Here is my audience. 293. All right. Politicians have an important job. They are tasked with creating laws, upholding the Constitution, creating the federal budget, all sorts of important tasks they have to do. And surely we wouldn't allow these politicians to be so easily corrupted by allowing them to participate in the stock market, right? Wrong. My goal today is to persuade you that politicians should be banned from owning and trading stocks. And although I feel my argument is logical enough to prove itself, I still have done extensive research so that I can inform you guys today. First, I'm going to talk about the problem itself. Next, I'm going to talk about what kind of led up to this problem, what caused it. And lastly, we are going to talk about my proposed solution for this problem. So let's get right into the problem itself. When politicians are allowed to trade and own stocks, it creates a big conflict of interest that ultimately harms the American people. And when a politician has a large amount of money tied up in stocks, they begin to use their political power to influence the way that stock performs. And again, this just hurts the American people when they're siding with the corporation, even at the expense of the public. I have an example of this. Representative Major Taylor Greene, she invested in the company Palantir. This is a mass surveillance company. Most Americans are pretty against this company, but she invested a large sum of money into this company. And next thing you know, this company, Palantir, secures a $30 million contract with the government. And what do you know? Her stocks go up 142%. And to me, that's just not a coincidence. So that's not just a matter of insider trading. That's just her using her political power at the expense of the American people to boost her stocks. And keep in mind, this is just one instance. This is just one representative. This is just one company. This happens with so many different politicians and so many different companies. So it's a big, widespread issue. It's so big that according to Common Cause, in 2025, Congress made over 13,000 stock trades, and they traded over $630 million on the stock market. And again, when politicians act in their own self-interest, it really just hurts the American people. And they tend to leave behind the middle class and the lower class in our country. And over time, we've seen them doing so has led to a huge wealth gap issue in our country. According to inequality.org, the top 1% of our country control over 30% of the wealth in our nation. I have a graph of that. And the wealth gap might be taken more seriously if politicians weren't directly benefiting from this wealth gap. And causes, I believe, that are happening that have made this issue such a big thing is a failure in our checks and balances system itself, a flawed free market system, and just false narratives around the issue. So as far as that failed checks and balances system goes, think about it like this. Congress is in charge of creating the laws, but they're also the ones benefiting from the issue. So they are expected to create a law to stop them from getting rich. It's a direct, it's just a flawed system. It hasn't worked. They haven't stopped themselves, and realistically, who knows if they ever will. And in terms of the flawed free market system, in America, our free market means that we have limited government intervention so long as these purchases are voluntary. And politicians have used that kind of free market to defend their role in the stock market. And according to CNBC, Nancy Pelosi, when asked about the issue, has said, when asked if they should be banned, she said, no, we're a free market. We should be allowed to participate in that. Mind you, Nancy Pelosi also has been able to grow her net worth to over $260 million in the stock market. She has outperformed the S&P 500 by a large amount over the last decade. She has investments in Tesla, Amazon, Apple, all sorts of big, huge billion-dollar corporations. And as far as the false narratives go, that's like when a politician gets busted for insider trading, it grabs the headlines. Sometimes they even serve a prison sentence for it. And it creates this narrative that it must be highly regulated, right? If they're getting in trouble for it and it's such a big deal, that it must be under control. When that's not the case. That's insider trading. That's a completely different issue than just the issue of them owning stock. So it's really different, and it also, like I said, it creates an illusion that it's all under control. And the solution I have to the problem is that we demand Congress pass the Restore Trust in Congress Act. And this act would ban politicians, their spouses, and their children from owning and trading stocks, futures, and all types of similar assets. And I think regardless of your political party, you should be in support of this act because it would just benefit the American public as a whole. And according to Harvard Law, there has been an uptick in bipartisan support for this bill. There has now been over 80 co-sponsors on both sides, like I said, because people are starting to see that this type of bill needs to pass. What I like about this bill is that the wording makes it so that you can't really have any loopholes, right? It just bans it outright. There's nothing you could really do to go around it. And other solutions in the past have failed because they kind of beat around the bush. There was, in 1978, the Ethics in Government Act, which made it so that government officials had to annually, just once a year, once annually, disclose all their financial information. And that really just addressed transparency. That didn't really address conflict of interest. And then again in 2012, Congress and Obama passed the SOX Act, which instead of once a year disclosing their information, it took it one step further. Every 30 to 45 days, they had to come out with a report of disclosing all their stock trades. And again, this just addresses transparency. But what does transparency do if, like I showed the graphic earlier, we know what Nancy Pelosi and other politicians are doing with their money? That doesn't change the fact that they're doing it. And as long as they're getting filthy rich, I don't think they mind being transparent either. So now that you understand the issue, let's wrap up. Today, I persuaded you on why politicians should be banned from owning and trading stocks. First, we talked about the problem. Next, I went over what kind of led up to the problem. And lastly, we just finished up talking about my solution. What I'd like for you guys to do now is just spread the word on the issue. Talk to your friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, whoever you can, and just stress the importance of passing this act. And also call your local and state politicians and let them know that they need to support this act